Good afternoon, everyone. Now we have our Keynote 3 with John Keane and Baogang. I'm Jean-Pierre Cabestan from Hong Kong Baptist University's Department of Government and International Studies. I'm delighted to have been invited to chair this session, which title is a bit intriguing, but I'm sure very stimulating: The Galaxy Empire. It's very much about China, China itself, China and the world. If I may to introduce this session, pose two questions. Are we witnessing a power transition between China and the US? Is China going to supplant the US? Are these questions sensible? Should be they asked, or should we ask other questions about China's today and China's future? To debate about the Galaxy Empire, we have two terrific speakers who are accomplices, actually, in an enterprise today, to an endeavor to work on a new book together. Their name are Baogang and John Keane. Baogang is a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences in Australia. He's an old friend of mine, and we haven't seen each other for quite a while because of COVID, but I remember when Baogang was in Singapore before moving to Australia, where he has published quite a lot about the deliberative politics in China and other issues related to China and Asia. We also have John Keane, who is a professor of politics at the University of Sydney, and who is well known for his work on democracy. Some of his books have been listed in his short bio in the program. I can't resist mentioning The Life and Death of Democracy, published in 2009, some time ago. But John has stopped there and has published two more very, very great books about democracy: The Future of Monetary Democracy into 2018, and last year, The New Despotism, which is also about the failure of democracy. So I think the two speakers are going to speak for 15 minutes, so we have ample time for Q&A. I will first invite Professor John Keane to speak, and then to Baogang to follow with his own presentation. So John, thank you for coming, and the floor is yours. À vous. Oh, you have to unmute first. Okay, yeah.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Jean-Pierre. I want to say 早上大家好，大家早上好，早安, bonjour, good morning, everybody. A very warm thank you to Hong Kong Baptist University for this invitation. Particular thanks to Cherian George, Kenneth Paul Tan, Daya Tusu, Ju Ying, and also to one of my former students from the past century, Dean Yu Huang. It's a great pleasure to be with you all. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been discussing for the past day the rising controversies about whether or to what extent our world is entering a new Cold War and what that phrase means. Here in this session, Baogang and I, working on a project together, which will be a book, bring to this discussion, we hope, a fresh understanding of exactly how to make sense of this emergent China. I want to make 3 points, beginning with the Chinese proverb that when winds of change blow, some people build walls while others build windmills. This old proverb, well known, is a reminder that we may well be living through a transition from failing attempts to maintain America's greatness in the world to China's return after 2 centuries of subjugation to global preeminence. There are many symptoms of this transition which is underway. China is now the largest trading country and owner of half of the world's patents. It has outflanked bodies such as the IMF to become the world's largest global creditor. It's the EU's main trading partner in goods. It's the principal investor and trader in the world's largest free trade zone in Africa, where an estimated million cross-border workforce, as they are called, are engaged in various Chinese projects. There has been a very rapid rise in and a rivalry with the US in Latin America in investments and extraction of resources. China is the largest buyer of copper and other minerals, including rare earths, in Latin America. Shanghai has meanwhile become bigger and more important than Hong Kong, Tokyo, and Singapore. It's the most important financial center in the Asian region. And we know as well that some of the world's largest telecommunications giants, such as China Telecom, recently its license to trade in the United States has been revoked, and China Mobile. We are aware that the PLA has become the world's largest standing army with 2 million troops, backed by an expanding nuclear arsenal, more subs than any other power. And it's little wonder, given all of these trends, that there are politicians and diplomats who are waxing eloquent about China as an extraordinarily important country, as the Chilean foreign minister put it, or as Boris Johnson put it quite recently, a gigantic fact in our lives. The second point, the first ought to be obvious. The second is that we are also, I think, well aware that this giant fact in our lives has become immensely controversial and has generated numerous misconceptions of what this emergent China is. There are, of course, Western observers, I'm thinking of Martin Jakes, who endorse China's strength and resilience and dynamism, as he puts it, who think that actually China is a force for good in the world, a global civilization on the rise, from which the world will benefit. There are, on the other hand, figures like Steve Bannon, currently under criminal investigation, who has for some time been saying that China will experience the fate of the Soviet Union, that it will, in the end, sooner or later, collapse. A colleague and friend of mine, Pei Minxin, has been saying this for some 3 decades, and still China is here. At the opposite end of the political spectrum to this collapse doctrine are those who consider China to be a highly resilient and dangerous global leviathan. There are figures in their ranks like Elbridge Colby, who played an important role in drafting the 2018 National Defense Strategy under President Trump, who speaks of a strategy of denial, who actually thinks that war should be given a chance against China. He actually recommends a military confrontation with China. There are plenty of people who, in effect, repeat the old warning attributed to Napoleon: "There sleeps China, God pity us, if she wakes, let her sleep." There are many who believe that a lengthy period of fraught rivalry is now happening. Ai Weiwei is among those. And there are those who are insisting that actually a new Cold War is inevitable and even upon us. Not to be overlooked in this mishmash of interpretations, these controversies, are the ironists. I'm thinking of Joschka Fischer, who was Germany's foreign minister, who says that efforts by the United States to make America great again are likely to result unintentionally in making China great again. Third point, and coming to the core of what I want to say, striking in these controversies is the absence of the word empire. 帝国 is the Chinese word. It is agreed widely that there has been a shift from the Deng Xiaoping crossing rivers by feeling for stones period to Xi Jinping's fearless crossing of oceans. Not everybody is agreed that this involves a robust militaristic China. Figures like Barry Buzan, for example, speak of China as an introverted power, and he predicts in the age of deep pluralism that there will be no further superpowers in our world. There are even those, James Keane, recently the FT China correspondent, who suggests that China might well be becoming a hermit kingdom. Those views, I think, are mistaken. What is striking, however, is the way that this word empire is rarely used as a descriptor of the big trends that are manifestly underway. It is interesting, and I know from experience that directly inside the People's Republic that the word Diguo can't officially be used to describe this emergent Chinese power in the world. It is said to be a bad word. It is said to be what was done to China. It conveniently forgets, of course, that the whole history of China from before the Common Era was a history of empires. What does it mean to speak of an empire? Well, if empire means a jumbo-sized state that exercises political, economic, and cultural power over millions of people at great distances from its own heartlands, without much regard for the niceties of territorial sovereignty, then technically China is rapidly becoming an empire. The symptoms are everywhere to see. Baogang will say something about the Belt and Road Initiative. It's the most prominent global project of the past decade. The amount of infrastructure investment is 7 times that, for instance, of the Marshall Plan implemented by the United States after 1945. And it is very clearly an alternative to pivot to Asia. I have no time to discuss it. Less well known is the way in which this emergent China, this new empire, is engaged busily in the building of cross-border institutions. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Chiang Mai currency swap arrangement, China's activities in APEC, in the regional comprehensive economic partnership, and recently it has, as you probably know, applied to join the CPTPP, the United States, from which the United States withdrew. Much less well known in this cross-border institution building, more than 25 of them have been built in the last 3 decades, is China's micro involvements in cross-border institutions, often propping up those institutions. A case in point is the WTO dispute settlement body. Trump tried to kill it by not appointing judges. China joined with the European Union, Canada, Australia, Singapore, Brazil, Chile, and a dozen other countries to actually form an interim appeal body to keep the WTO disputes procedures alive. The third point is that I want to say on this third point something about the concept of a galaxy empire. We all know that in the field of politics, as in life, words count. Finding a language to describe this new China, it is not a territorial sovereign state, despite official pronouncements. Finding a new language is for He Baogang and I an imperative. It is a central part of our project. What does it mean to speak of a galaxy empire? In He Di Guo. Well, there are 4 reasons why we want to introduce this phrase, and which we think descriptively has a great deal of purchase. The first is a rather playful usage. It's a celestial simile, of course. Galaxy empire refers to stars or heavens. And it's a reminder that in the 19th century, Chinese people were often nicknamed by white people celestials. And we also know that in that century, many Chinese writers throughout the Qing dynasty referred to the celestial empire or the heavenly dynasty, Jiangqiao. More seriously, this phrase, secondly, is of course a simile drawn from astrophysics and astronomy. To speak of a galaxy is to speak of a vast gravitational system that comprises many elements: dust, dark matter, gas, thousands of dispersed but interconnected stars arranged in spirals or elliptical or irregularly shaped clusters. The new Chinese empire, our suggestion is a massive galaxy of dynamically entangled institutions and practices that are gravitationally centered on its Beijing heartlands. This notion that the emergent China is a complex, heterogeneous polity with a great an inner diversity is very important, and it seems to us that it's also important for understanding the polysemic qualities of the language, the rhetoric through which this emergent empire is rising. This is not an empire with a single ideology. The languages used in various places on the planet are themselves fluid and polysemic. To speak about a galaxy empire has a third connotation, and that is it's a reminder that actually China is showing signs, its leadership showing signs of intense strategic interest in the world beyond our planet. It is literally reaching into the heavens. It has set out to become the world's leading space-faring power for various reasons: military and espionage reasons, to be sure, nuclear deterrence, to be sure, but also new sources of energy production and harnessing. You may know that in 2024, the US-Russia International Space Station is scheduled to close. This would make China the sole remaining big power in our inner solar system. This galaxy empire simile also alerts us to the role of satellite global communications. You may know that China is now using a global navigation system by Dou, the Northern Dipper, which is a rival to the US global positioning system. It is this use of Baidu, which is part of a disentangling, an uncoupling of the Chinese empire from the United States. And you will also know that China now has an active moon landing program and journeys to Mars and Venus and so on. And you will know also that in the past months, China docked astronauts on the Tianhe, the Harmony in Heaven core module, which led Xinhua to announce that finally the first Communist Party branch had been founded in outer space. But there is a final reason, and the most or the least obvious that helps, I hope you understand why this galaxy empire thesis and phrase is important. It was Marshall McLuhan, the great Toronto School analyst of communications, where I studied, who spoke about galaxies to describe space-time transformations of communication. And the thesis of the Toronto School is that communications infrastructures, communications revolutions, structure power, they structure bodies, senses of cognition, whole mentalities, views of the world. In this respect, what we want to say this morning is that actually China is the first empire to be born of the unfinished digital communications network revolution. It was Harold Innis of the Toronto School who first worked on communications systems and empires. This is our big thesis. It follows from this that China is not to be understood as a land-based empire. This is a mistake made recently by the former Australian Prime Minister Paul Keating. And it is not a sea power, as much of the, principally a sea power, which is what much of the South China Sea controversies are about. It's not an air power, it's a combination of all of those, but it's a power, an empire that is deeply dependent upon digital network communications infrastructures. There are many examples of this. Jean-Pierre, I'm not sure how much longer.
I think you're close to time's over.
Okay, so I'll give you just some tasters of what we have in mind. Striking is the way that this new Chinese empire does not draw boundaries, as for example, the Europeans did in the 1890s conference in Berlin. Flows, connecting cities by high-speed rail. Flows are a structuring feature of this empire. This empire is also founded upon and driven by large media conglomerates. In our work, we are looking at Tencent. We are looking at one of the basic innovations of Tencent, WeChat. WeChat could be described as the semaphore, the railroad, the horse and cart, the radio and television of this empire. It is a basic means of communication used throughout the empire. If you want to do business with a Chinese business, you will use WeChat and so on. I'm sorry for the truncated ending. I wanted to point out, if I may, just in a few seconds, Jean-Pierre, that in this project, unmentioned so far this morning, in this project, we are deeply interested in the way this new Chinese empire, or to what extent it is disengaging from, disentangling from the American empire, and the degree to which there is competition or cooperation. We are certainly interested in the heartlands of this empire. What kind of polity is it? I have written as much as I can on this topic. We also have said nothing this morning, but we do in our project ask the question, what kind of empire is this comparatively speaking? To what extent is there room inside it for forms of pluralism? To what extent is it a mosaic? It is not an empire describable in terms of Nazi Germany, lasted 11 years, driven by military expansion. Does it resemble more closely the Ottoman Empire, for example? And finally, we ask whether this empire suffers certain structural characteristics. We know that no empire lasts forever. What are the structural problems of this empire? Well, one of them has to do with matters of military hardware, the rise of military power, and questions of peace and war. And so I'm very glad to hand to my friend and colleague and co-author, Baogang.
Thank you, John. Thank you for this great presentation. Without transition, any transition, Baogang, it's your turn. Yeah. You have the floor.
Thank you. So what I follow John's speech, I will focus on the essential question. Is China a war-making empire? So this is the issue. So in the conventional understanding, empire, when we use empire, so empire always means war. Lenin famous describes the First World War as a result of division of the world for the partition and the repartition of colony and the sphere of influence, driven by this modern finance capital. Today, rather than Lenin's framework of imperialism, what we see is a great power transition theory. In particular, the Grant Ellison formulate a term called Thucydides traps. So the issue
are there slides? Do you have slides?
Yes, can you see the slides?
No, we can't see the slides. We can't. Do you have it uploaded?
So I need to share slides. Okay.
Yes, can you share them with us?
Okay, just wait a second.
Because I've been told you we can't. Yes, we can't see them actually.
Okay. Yeah, I was
share screen.
This
one.
It's coming. Then I share this.
I think it's coming. Hang on.
So it's come up now?
Yes.
Okay. So I think I missed a few slides. That's the matter. Okay, I'll just show you.
Okay. Oh.
Let me come back. Well, so as I said, the way I'm trying to focus on also, does this Galaxy Empire have a logic of initiating and leading to the war? This is so. Is the Chinese Empire an aggressive war machine? So our answer is no. Chinese Galaxy Empire has a multiple holder and actors, and of course there are some actors, some sectors support the Chinese militarizations, but the Chinese Empire is different from the Nazi Empire. We explain why China wants peace. Why China aim to secure peace. So Chinese, this new Galaxy empires is based on industrial structure and a global political economy. Chinese BAR functionally require peace, favor non-violent strategy. So this peace effect is not propaganda. It is not driven by the military industry complexities. In the contrast, the American empire is driven by this complexity. Yet it is certainly for China to develop Chinese version of the military industry complexity in the next decades. So we don't know how the Chinese version of military industry in complexity will impact the future of Chinese warfare. But at least currently, the Chinese BAR has a logic to pursue the peace. We will explain later on in the shortly. So one of the things I think is that China is a champion for this global peace. So China has self-proclaimed as a force of global peace. In fact, rests upon spin, silence, and secrecy. According to Stockholm International Peace Research Institute's data published last year, Chinese military expanding is estimated about $252 billion. China is a world's second largest arms manufacturer and has a more cruise missile and middle-range ballistic records than United States. Its Navy force is the world's largest. So nevertheless, Chinese champion of global peace does has its economic logic with a strong economic incentive. The modern Chinese empire, today's empire, is one that is industry-based, unlike the previous Chinese empire is based on agriculture. So under the logic of agriculture-based empire, the more land you grab, the more tax you will receive. But currently, Chinese this industry-based empire, its survivals and expansion depends on international trade in expanding and finding a new market. Such tasks are much more easily understood in a geopolitical peaceful settings. So the BAR is this big project. Largely, in order to make sure this BAR, those projects go everywhere, in order to make it successfully, China needs the peace at all the corners of the world. Any disruption, the war will disrupt the Chinese BAR project. So that's probably, that economic logic is really different from the American military industry complex, because the America have this military industry complex benefit from localized conflict. If somewhere they have a conflict, then this complex make the money. And the Biden administration tried to develop alternative BAR project, global infrastructure project. If it were implemented successfully, then Americans say, suppose America want to build a largest this undersea bridge or the tunnel across the Taiwan to Japan or to China, and immediately Americans have an incentive to maintain peace. So that's the logic why China have a kind of the really this Galaxy Empire has so far gone to great lengths in its attempts to ensure that a stable international climate is peaceful. And we already see that China spent a lot of effort in just as the year began the BAR, China was engaged in the immediate mediation of 3 conflicts in the 2017, that China has involved the 9 mediation of 9 conflicts globally. And so the Chinese is a kind of different, it's a different kind of logic, because this is based on this economy. So it's kind of in Chinese term called the 发展和平, developmental peace. So through the development, and then we will achieve the peace. Their logic is different from the American democratic peace. Through the promotion of democracy, and the 2 democratic countries will not fight each other. So the Chinese have a different kind of a theoretical underpin, different logic. And I should say this, the peace logic of the BAR is not a new phenomenon. In 1990s, Japan exercised it diplomatically with regard to a number of Asian conflicts, like Cambodia, Timor-Leste, Aceh, Mindanao, Sri Lanka. So Japan promotes its peace building in Asia. So what China doing currently, work in Afghanistan, in Bangladesh, and Myanmar, is kind of do the similar kind of things that Japan did. So let me just emphasize that again, the Chinese, this political economic logic, different from that of the United States military industry complexity, which rely on the conflict market to maintain weapon system export. So symbolically underpin this point, in last year, China signed, ratified arms trade treaty. United States had in a year early under the Trump administration withdraw from it. So this year, so America is in terms of international arms export, America is kind of largest. America account for 37, and the Chinese only account 5% of global total. So one of the issues, probably as we just try to argue, so that if you look at this logic of the basis of Chinese new empire is more driven by economy, international political economy, then it's kind of, it's desperately try to appease the environment. But at the same time, this economic logic is complicated by another equally powerful logic, historical logic. That is that China has a kind of historical logic of great union. So today's issue is about Taiwan. the issue, whether the Taiwan issue will be a potential war over Taiwan. So the real issue whether there's some dangerous of unintended consequence of US and China military rival over Taiwan question. So let me just explain that, just several key points. So first, the reunification with Taiwan in the Chinese kind of whole 2,000-year imperial history is historical based. So this Beijing currently is prepare a war against Taiwan's independence and also against Washington's new initiative of playing Taiwan card to contain China. So Beijing has at another area we will not touch today is adopt the green zone strategy to taking control of South China Sea. It has a weaponized island in South China Sea. We will not touch on this issue. But let's just say this, currently Xi Jinping, he has demonstrated his passionate determination, even to some extent we call the heavenly duty, Tianzi, of reunified Taiwan with mainland China. She said that the reunification could not be delayed from one generation to next generation. So here I should emphasize this Chinese Galaxy Empire on the issue of Taiwan. It has a restorative quality. That is reclaim the lost territory. So Chinese empires, unlike the previous European empires, go to another place, invade a place, take the territory. So in the case of Taiwan, it's restorative, it's reclaim the lost territory.
Oh, so 2 minutes.
Okay, in this sense, the Andrew Nathan said that China is not expansionist. So China has adopted a different kind of a strategy, try to deal with Taiwan. One is this called 软硬兼施. They have a soft and hard measures. In particular, in the last few years, even this year, we see China tighten its measure against Taiwan. So even last month, 39 fighter jets crossed into Taiwan defense zone. So what we need to watch on whether Beijing will impose blockade or electronic magnet pulse attack to paralyze weapon system of Taiwan. So the Chinese current intention is try to, through this 软硬兼施, to force Taiwan surrendering. Historically, there's two events. Qian Chu, the last king of the Wu Yue kingdom, surrounding his reign to the Song dynasty to avoid a military conflict and save life of people in 947. Sekya Pedita was summoned to Lanzhou to meet Prince Gaodan in 1247. Subsequently, issue a famous letter that facilitated a peaceful reunification between Tibet and the Yuan dynasty. So Beijing currently wishes that it could achieve a similar peaceful reunification through its military power and economic independence. With the increased economic power of Galaxy Empire, peaceful reunification with Taiwan is feasible and desirable. But nevertheless, Chinese plan has met strong resistance from Washington. We already see like from the Trump, from the Bidens. So I will not, we don't have time to repeat those detailed story. But what I've said, what I try to make a final point is this, that if you look back at the Chinese history, Chinese imperial history always involved war, but occasionally China does offer currently a leader a lesson how to maintain peace, to manage the US and the China relation. So we see this is in the Song Dynasty. Song signed this Taiyuan Treaty with Liao. And that's the Taiyuan treaties last more than 100 years peace. That's the result of more than 100-year peace. So the record probably is better than Westphalia. Westphalia, they delivered peace about 86 years also. So people might say that this is irrelevant to today because there's a contemporary 21st century difference. But the one issue probably we can draw a lesson from this Taiyuan Treaty is a rivalry partnership. Song and Liao, they signed the treaty, had more than 100 years of peace. At the same time, they are still rivalry. They still engage a lot of rival competition. And probably we need today is kind of go beyond, come back to the thing of this conference. We need to go beyond this Cold War strategy to say farewell to Canada Long Telegram, to find a new imagination. That new imagination can be a historical based, learn lesson from the peaceful coexisting of the Song and the Liao Empire. Those peaceful coexisting of the Song and the Liao, that fact cannot easily be explained either by Lenin's theory of the inevitable war and or by the power transition theory. So Chinese Galaxy Empire and the history of the Song and the Liao peace treaty tell us a different story. Sometimes empire does not necessarily driven to a war. What we need is to abandon a Cold War mentality and return to the Chinese history, and also go deeply to the operation of the BAR-driven Chinese empire. Then we might find a recipe for global peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Baogang. Thanks to the two speakers for this very, very stimulating, challenging, and ambitious project. I look forward to reading your book, Galaxy Empire. I have some questions, of course, since I've also been interested in those issues. But I'll first check with the audience whether there are some questions from the audience. I don't, well, yes, I see her here. So I will first invite the audience to speak. You first, maybe. Yes, can they hear you? Can you just, can they see you as well?
Good morning. This is Daya Tusu.
Yes.
John, can you hear me?
Yes,
Oh,
clearly.
Thank you.
Hi.
These are the ones.
Here it's coming. Yeah, the camera is coming to you. Coming to okay. Good.
Good to see you.
Namaste.
Namaste. You do it this way, right? Because this is also important in the time of social distancing. You don't do this, you do this. It also means I bow to thee because you are pious, right? So there's meaning to it. Ali, apart that. Thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. I'm particularly personally interested because the way you framed it, this whole idea of galaxy, is so interesting and original in many ways. That, it helped me my own. I'm writing a book about geopolitics of global communication. I thought I've got to rework some of it because what you just said in your presentation was really interesting. And I very much look forward to the book. The question I wanted to ask is there a danger that we are exaggerating the power of this new China, especially in the domain of the digital world, whether it is the world of entertainment, news, or internet more broadly? If we look around the world, still the US imprint is much wider and stronger than China can reach in foreseeable future. So is there a tendency to exaggerate? Because we have also had the experience of the 1980s, the Japan threat and Japan taking over the United States or the West. Actually, that didn't happen, as we all know. And at that time, Japan's level of economic development was much higher than what China is today. per capita income and other indexes of development. So is there a problem in the way we are perhaps seeing too much in what actually is not that big a deal?
I'm going to take the, okay, thank you. I'm going to take the other question so you can answer the two questions together. Okay, go ahead. Because we don't have much time left and just 15 minutes left, I guess.
This is Minos. I'm a PhD student of the School of Communication. I wanted to ask you the question probably goes to both professors. According to Professor Keane's book about new despotism, he was arguing inside that new despotism are considered actually democracies, form of democracies. So my question in what you both presented is the empire actually a democracy or, a form of something like that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
Baogang. If you would like to go first,
okay,
I take
so
the second.
What about I address the second question, you address first question?
Yeah, okay. I was going to do it around the other way, but
okay, yeah.
But I begin with Daya's question, yeah? So, Daya, thank you very much. And very interested in your interest in the galaxy simile, which of course has roots into the Toronto School and its understanding and analyses of empires and communication systems. Throughout our project, today it came across too simple. Throughout our project, there is an emphasis on tendencies. I mean, this is not a fait accompli, but it is at least an open question whether the digital giants, the telecommunication behemoths of this emergent empire are rivals, serious rivals to Silicon Valley. Short answer is we think so. And there are, if you look at the anatomy of a company like Tencent, paradoxically, it's largely owned by a South African consortium. But if you look at Tencent, it is on a number of fronts, video games and so on, the world's largest already. And if you look at Huawei and look at what it's doing in Africa, it got the 5G contract for South Africa to wire up South Africa to enable smart ports, smart medicine, and so on. This is not to be underestimated. And it is, so to say, early days. On matters of artificial intelligence, robotics, I think the evidence is that the Chinese political economy is at least as strong as that of Silicon Valley. One last thought, it came across, I think, too briefly and too simplistically in what I had to say in my opening remarks, but it should be emphasized that every modern empire, ancient as well, every modern empire rested upon the foundation of communications devices and structures. The British built an empire on the basis of sea power using Dutch technology plus the steam engine. The United States built its empire westwards through the telegraph and the telephone, for instance. Our thesis is that this is the first great polity, great political economy that is born of the digital unfinished communications revolution. And it is an open question as to who will come out on top or the degree to which there is entanglement, but it's to be taken seriously. I don't think we want to exaggerate this trend, but we want to point out its historic importance.
Okay, Baogang.
Thank you for the question about empire and democracy. So in our project, we try to show the complexity relationship between empire, democracy, and autocracy. So the John Hobson's famous book about imperialism, he shows a one-dimensional relationship. That is, empire is always associated with autocracy. So he said that he tried to show how the empire, when British built the empire and increase its autocratic elements, undermine the popular control. So we dispute the John Hobbes's this view. We try to show that how the Chinese empire building is complexity. Chinese introduced local democracy elements at home, but China also coexists the democracy overseas. Even China funding the Cambodia election, provided money, and China provided rescue support for Italy, Greece. So China did not kind of stop the election in Italy or try to kind of destroy their electoral system. It's try to work through with them. So what do we find is quite interesting. Is let me still go back to the BAI. So if you think about this BAI project, it's a kind of largely infrastructure project, connect country and country, continent to continent. So the project is disregard political regime, whether democratic, authoritarian, as long, whatever, what kind of political regime, the Chinese aim is to connect together. And through that, China gains a lot of economic benefit. So the BAI is theoretically is political neutral, but in operational level, we found it's quite interesting because the democratic states like United States, Australia resist the BAI, then force China work more and more with authoritarian state. So then we suddenly found that there's a strong association between Chinese empire building and the authoritarian regime. But this is accidental. It's not logically required by Chinese empire. It's accidentally. And as I just said, the Chinese empire can also be a pro-democracy too.
Okay, can I make maybe, yes, ask some questions? Yes, you want to add something?
Could I just add 30 seconds?
Okay, go ahead.
Jean-Pierre. Yes, I mean, in addition to what Baogang had to say, one of the advantages, we think, of the category of empire is that it reminds us of, it emphasizes the polyglot, the kaleidoscopic quality that is typical of empires, unlike territorial nation states. And it is an open question, it's an empirical question as to whether democracy, understood as the restraint of arbitrary power, it's an open question as to whether inside the heartlands of this empire, there are forms of democracy. Yes, there is Xinjiang, but there's also local elections, and there are power scrutinizing mechanisms that the party uses throughout the system. And abroad, yes, there are events like the funding of the 2018 elections in Cambodia. But there's also the AIIB, which has an integrity unit. It's emerging as one of the world's largest banks. Beijing accepted the principle of an integrity unit to prevent corruption and unwise risk-taking. So it is a question for us as to what extent this empire is tolerant of and nurtures democratic accountability, and or whether there is a shortage of democratic accountability, which is, in the end, the great weakness of all empires.
Okay, well, I have there are questions, but I have one comment and two questions actually myself about your very, very interesting presentations. In hearing your presentation, I have still the view, the strong feeling that we are in a kind of new Cold War. This technological rivalry between the US and China is really a fact of life today. This military rivalry as well, as you mentioned. and the ideological rivalry is also deepening. All the more with Xi Jinping now becoming a new dictator in China, head of the Mao and Deng Xiaoping. So we have many of the elements of the Cold War. But my question is about the world empire. Actually, Chinese modernizers have tried for a century to turn an empire into a nation since 1911. And the question is, how can they come back to this, this entity which you call an empire? Why don't you use the term hegemon or hegemonism? Baogang in Chinese is part of the Chinese tradition, and I think what's happening beyond the borders of China is much more the emergence of a new hegemon rather than an empire. All the more because China is very keen to keep its, to remain a very, very Westphalian country, Westphalian nation state, protecting its sovereignty, to the end. So that's my first question. My second question is about the risk of war. You haven't, and I agree with you, Baogang, that, well, you didn't mention the two-cities trap, but you're saying that China is not going to fall in it. But I think China is facing a tension here between the BRI and all these projects which are aimed as peace, as building peace around the world through development, and its ambition to reunify with Taiwan. The problem with Taiwan is Taiwan doesn't belong to the Communist Party. So you have to think about what the Taiwanese think about their future. The Taiwanese identify with the Republic of China and not with the PRC, and will never identify with the PRC. Now, if China wants to trigger World War III, of course they can embark into an invasion of Taiwan and annexation of Taiwan. But that will destroy the whole plan of building a peaceful empire, a peaceful new hegemonic peace directed by China. So how do you solve that tension? That's my two questions to you, Baogang and John.
Maybe I take the first question.
Okay.
Baogang?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think that there are several reasons why the descriptor New Cold War doesn't so far apply. This is not, if we take for a moment the category of empire, and we have a previously dominant US empire after 45, global empire. If we take seriously the category of empire, what is striking is that ideological warfare is actually much more diffuse. From the Chinese point of view, an advantage of the category of empire is that we emphasize the polysemic quality of this empire. So to say, those who govern come dressed in coats of many different colors. Yes, there is talk of Marxism and the revival of that, Jean-Pierre, but there is also speeches given by Xi Jinping about the need to think of an ecological civilization, and the speeches could be written by Greenpeace International. There is talk of development, there is talk of democracy. It has functional advantages. This is not a straight, autocracy, democracy tension. Sorry, Joe Biden. It's also the case, Viktor Nemtyanov yesterday beautifully said it, that a new Cold War seems to be inappropriate language because there are common global threats. And it's not surprising that China, perhaps from our perspective, that China and the United States took their revenge on the Hong Kong Baptist University conference on a new Cold War by announcing something dramatic to Glasgow about cooperation. There are no fighting of proxy wars so far. That was an element of the new Cold War. And it's also the case, as we've explained, that China is agnostic about other countries' domestic political structures, for instance. That's what you would expect of a galaxy empire. So for these reasons, we don't think that a new Cold War, descriptively speaking, is yet the right language. And one last remark, Xi is often described, if I could take an historical analogy, as someone like Sultan Selim I, he ruled the Ottoman Empire for about 8 years. He outdid his father. He murdered his 2 brothers. Xi Jinping is not to be described in old-fashioned emperor terms. More complicated character, dependent upon a much more complicated political economy, structure, and empire. Also, we think.
Okay, Baogang.
Yeah, Jean-Pierre, thank you for wonderful, very sharp 2 questions. The first question is ideology, Cold War. I think that Xi Jinping's promotion of the socialism currently even established Xi Jinping's thought, all for domestic purpose, domestic consumption. That is the old way to exercise social political control. So it's unlikely for China, this Galaxy Empire, to present an ideology rival against the dominant Western liberal democracy. They try to do so, but ideologically, they cannot match. And currently, they are purely for domestic. They even cannot promote this authoritarian value to unify those authoritarian states. It's impossible for China to do so. They are realistic enough, but it's only focused on domestic consumption. So in that sense, currently those ideological, rhetorical speak up. If we need to go through it, it's just rhetorical. It's nothing like a Cold War ideological rival. At that time, it's a truly ideological rival when the liberalism, when the socialism. So that's first point. Second question, it's thank you, a wonderful question. I mentioned in my talk, I said this economic logic of the peace effects is compromised and complicated this historical logic. Xi Jinping is driven to unify Taiwan largely for his historical mission. For him, is a heavily duty. He needed to do so. And so we have to see those tension between, as you're right, between those 2 logic. But so far, the economic logic prevails. In each time, when you have a crisis, before you reach to the war, and the historical logic give up or modified, and economic logic prevail. So I hope in the next 10 years, that is still case. That is the economic logic is greater than historical logic.
What about hegemonism? You didn't answer the question. What do you choose empire instead of hegemony?
When we use empire, I think it's already a hegemony. Empire implies a hegemony. Okay, but what do we need to say? As you're right, Chinese empire is a different kind of new hegemony. And the whole our project is to try to understand how this hegemonical power operate differently in comparative context.
John?
Yes, of course, to be a technical pedant, hegemonia is originally Greek, and it refers to what came to be called empire.
But Pa is Chinese. Baogang is Chinese, and in China there is a tradition of Pa.
明白. Yeah, sure. But we do think that actually the literature on empire is much richer. It is a much more fruitful category than that concept of hegemony, Gramsci, hegemonia in international relations. There's much more to be learned from this literature on empire. John Darwin's After Tamerlane is a case in point. What we are trying to do is to, as Baogang has just said, to explore how it is that the world has never seen anything like this before. And I don't think using the category of hegemonic power, which is for me a kind of dull category, I don't think it does the work of explaining this historic novelty of a very big trend of our times.
Okay, we've been allowed to extend the session for another 4 minutes, 5 minutes. I have one question.
Already over.
Huh?
It's already over.
Oh, time is over?
That was 8 minutes ago.
Oh, okay. So I'm sorry. Okay.
We gave you 8 minutes ago.
All right. So actually, I'm out of step with the latest announcement. So, well, so I have to thank you for your presentation. So we're all looking forward for reading your book when it comes out. So good luck, and I hope we can see you again, maybe not only virtually, but in Hong Kong or in Australia in a not too distant future. So thank you again for coming and participating in this narrative narrating Cold War conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre. Merci beaucoup.
You.
Merci.